Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to continue on with the lecture on bond prices and yields. Last time we ended up talking about the discount bonds versus premium bonds and how the relationship between the yield to maturity and the coupon rate determined the price of the bond and whether it was discount or a premium bond. Today what we're going to do is start off by talking about time and how that variable impacts the value of a bond. And so I'll be using a TI-84 plus calculator here, like I've done in the past. We're going to start off here where we have bond A and bond B, and this again is the effect of time on bond values. The first part of this says bond A makes annual coupon payments based on an 8% coupon rate, has a yield to maturity of 9% and a time to maturity of 4 years. What is the value of the bond today? And so again, in the calculator, we're going to go out here. I'm going to press apps, and then of course 1 for finance, and then 1 for time value money solver. And my inputs are going to look like this. So it makes annual coupon payments based on an 8% coupon rate. So we know our payment needs to be 80 because it's going to be 8% of the $1,000 par value. My N is going to be 4 for 4 years. My interest rate is 9% for the yield to maturity. My present value is what I'm looking for. My future value is going to be the par value. And mind you, it's not here on the example because we use $1,000 unless we say otherwise. Okay. So I've got all my inputs in there. Now I need to calculate my present value. So to do that, I'm going to press alpha and then enter down here. And it tells me the value of that bond today is $967.60. So the value of the bond today is $967.60. And so if we go back and we look at what the bond value was before, and you can look back in your notes, but I'll go ahead and calculate it here for you too. So for bond A, when there was 7 years left to maturity, the price of the bond was, and again, if you look back in your notes, you can see this, but I'll just show you in the calculator. If I go back here and I say n is equal to 7 instead of n is equal to 4, and I change my, and I recalculate that price today, again, I'm going to press alpha and then enter. I get a value of $949.67. So the price was $949.67. So with 3 years passing, we go from 7 years left to 4 years left. We go from $949.67 to $967.60. So for a discount bond, as the maturity date approaches, the value of the bond increases. And it will increase until that maturity date when it's worth $1,000, because that's the value you're going to get on the maturity date as the bondholder. The value of the bond increases to the par value. Okay. So for a premium bond, we're going to see the opposite situation. Last time we calculated the value of the bond with 7 years remaining, and if you remember, that was $1,050 and I'm going to say 32 cents, but I'll go ahead and calculate it here just to make sure. So we last time we had bond B, we had 7 years to maturity, we had a yield to maturity of 9%, a coupon payment of $100, and our value was $1,050.33. So now we're changing that from 7 years remaining to 4 years remaining. So I'll go up here with 4 years remaining, and then press alpha and then enter. So just a little review here. It makes annual coupon payments based on a 10% coupon rate. That 10% coupon rate is going to result in us having a payment of $100, so it's 10% of that $1,000. We have 4 years remaining, so n is equal to 4. Our future value is $1,000 because that's the par value of the bond. And so our price today is going to be $132 and 39.7 cents, or 40 cents. So again, remember that it was at $1,050 and 33 cents with 7 years remaining. So for a premium bond, as the maturity date approaches, the value of the bond decreases to the par value. All right. What I want you to know for both premium bonds and discount bonds, as they approach maturity, as they hit that maturity date, the value is going to converge on $1,000, because on maturity date, that's the value of the bond. That's how much the investor is going to receive for that bond, is that par value or that principal value. And I'm just going to add a little note down here, just to make things complete. I'm going to say for bond B, when there was 7 years left until maturity, the price of the bond was $1,050.33. And to be grammatically correct, we'll just switch that too. Okay. As discount and premium bonds move toward their maturity dates, the bond values will converge to the par value. Okay. And sometimes people get the impression that it's better to buy a discount bond because the value of that bond's increasing. However, ignoring tax issues and ignoring any kind of transaction cost, the return to the investor is the same. For both of these bonds, the yield to maturity is 9%. That's the return they're going to earn on average every year. It's up to the bond holder, it's up to that investor to decide what they prefer. If an investor prefers to get larger coupon payments, then they're going to want to go with the premium bond, because that premium bond is going to give them a $100 annual payment. However, if they prefer to receive their returns through capital gains, through the change in the value of the bond, they're going to prefer the discount bond over here. And the next topic, when we talk about things like duration and convexity, these things do come into play for bond portfolios, where you're going to want to buy either that discount bond or that premium bond to give you the return you want over a specified time period. Okay. The next one we're going to talk about is bond yields. The yield to maturity, or YTM, is the interest rate that makes the present value of the bond's payments equals to its price. So for an example here, what is the yield to maturity of a bond that has a $50 semi-annual coupon payment, a price of $1,087, a par value of $1,000, and 7 years to maturity? So the first thing before we calculate anything is we can answer whether or not this is a discount or premium bond, and whether or not the yield to maturity will be more or less than the coupon rate. So is this a discount bond or premium bond? It's a premium bond because the price is greater than $1,000. It's a premium bond because the price is greater than $1,000. And we know for a premium bond, then the yield to maturity is going to be less than the coupon rate. Okay, the yield to maturity be less than the coupon rate. And that's why it's selling at a premium. And so now we're just going to test that out. We're going to figure out what the yield to maturity is for this bond. So in my calculator, again, I'm going to go to apps. Or I'm going to turn it on first, sorry. There we go. I'm going to press second and mode to clear everything out. Now I'm going to go to apps. I'm going to go to one for finance and one for time value money solver. And this is what my inputs are going to look like. So in this case, we have a semi-annual coupon payment in 7 years to maturity. So I'm going to take 2 times 7 to get 14. So my N is equal to 14 because there's 2 payments per year with 7 years left to maturity. My interest rate's what I'm looking for. My price, my current value is 1,087, so I'm going to go down here to present value and type in negative 1087. Oops. Oh, sorry. I make this mistake sometimes, so I'll show you what I did. I accidentally pressed the negative button here instead of the negative sign down at the bottom, so I'm going to fix that. Press that negative sign instead. Now it's going to let me move down. My payment is $50 instead of $100. My future value is $1,000 because that's my par value. My payments per year I'm going to change to 2, and I want you to see what happens when I change this to 2. The next value down will also change to 2 without me changing anything. So I'm going to press 2 and then the down arrow, and it changes to 2 on its own. P/Y stands for payments per year. C/Y stands for compounding periods per year. I'm going to go up to my interest rate now because I've got everything in that I need. And now I'm going to calculate what my yield to maturity is by pressing alpha and then enter. And I get a yield to maturity of 8.33%. So we have a yield to maturity, or a required rate of return for this bond, of 8.33%. As I mentioned before, we expected it to be less than 10% because this is a premium bond. So it needed to be less than the coupon rate, which was 10%. And that's what we found. The current yield for the bond is equal to the annual coupon payment divided by the bond price. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and calculate the current yield for this bond. The annual coupon payment is $100 divided by the current bond price of $1,087. And so I'm going to clear out of this mode by pressing second and mode. And then I'm just going to take 100 divided by 0.087. There we go. To get 9.1996%, or 9.20%. Okay. So for a premium bond, the current yield is greater than the yield to maturity. For a discount bond, it's going to be the opposite. The next thing we're going to talk about is the yield to call. So The yield to maturity is the annual rate of return that an investor will receive if they hold the bond until the maturity date. The yield to call is the annual rate of return that the bondholder will receive if they hold the bond until the first call date and if the bond is called. So when a bond is called, that means that the bond issuer has said to the bondholder, you're required to sell the bond back to us today for the call price. And the call price will be part of the bond agreement, and it's available. If you go out and look at the bond quotes, you'll see it out there, when the first call date is and what that call price is, how much the bond issuer will need to buy the bond for from the bondholder. So bond N is a callable bond that is currently selling for $987.50. It pays a semi-annual coupon based on a 7% annual coupon rate and has 15 years to maturity. It is callable in 5 years at a call price of $1,070. So the first thing is, what is the call premium? The call premium is the amount that the bond issuer has to pay in excess of the par value in order to call the bond. In this case, the par value is $1,000 and the call premium is $1,070. Oh, excuse me. The call premium is $1,070 minus $1,000, or $70. Okay. The yield to call for this bond. So I want to go through this with you because this is where a lot of people make mistakes, is the different inputs for this. So remember, what's happening here is that we're determining what the rate of return is for the bondholder. If they buy the bond today, and the bond price is going to be $987.50, if they hold on to it for 5 years, because that's when it's callable, and then they're paid an amount of $1,070 for that bond at that time. So in the calculator, we want to make sure that we get all these things correct. So again, I'm going to go out here to apps. Sorry, I'm going to turn on my calculator. There we go. I'm going to go to apps and then one for finance. And you're getting other options there. I've set this calculator up specifically for my finance classes. So that's why it's only giving you the finance option here. I'm going to go for one for TVM solver. And then my N is going to be equal to 10. And the reason why it's equal to 10 is that the bond is callable in 5 years. Okay? So it's callable in 5 years. And it has a semi-annual coupon. So we have 2 payments per year for 5 years. So our N is equal to 10. My interest rate's what I'm looking for. My present value is what I'm paying for the bond today. It's not $1,000. It's $987.50. So again, I'm going to press my negative sign here, negative $987.50. I'm going to scroll down here, my payment. So it is a semi-annual coupon based on a 7% annual coupon rate. So if this were paying an annual coupon, it would pay $70, but it's paying $35 because there's 2 payments per year. So I'm going to put down here 35 for my payment. My future value is not 1,000, it's 1,070. Because that's what I'm going to receive from the bond issuer if they call the bond. So just to review, n is equal to 10 because it's callable in 5 years with 2 payments per year. So our number of payments, or our number of periods, is 10. Our interest rate is what we're looking for. We haven't solved for that yet, so ignore that 8.33. That was the answer to the last problem. Our present value is what we're paying for that bond today. It's $987.50. The payment is not based on the call value. It's based on just the par value, the $1,000. And that's a mistake I see people make sometimes, is they'll put 1,070 multiplied by that 7% and get a number that's a little bit different. In this case, it's 7% of 1,000, which is $70. Because there's 2 payments per year, we divide that by 2. And because there's 2 payments per year, we have our payments per year down here equal to 2. So the only thing I need to change now is my interest rate, and this will be my yield to call. So I press alpha and I press enter to get 8.47%. Okay, so the yield to call for this bond is 8.47%. This answer makes sense because it is a discount bond, okay? And the yield is greater than, either yield to maturity or yield to call, is greater than the coupon rate. So that's how to calculate a yield to call. Now we're going to move into a kind of a more difficult problem. It's called the realized compound return versus the yield to maturity. So if you think about, especially an institution buying a bond, they're going to receive the returns from that bond every year. They're going to receive a coupon payment. Now they're going to have to make a decision what they do with that coupon payment. And oftentimes they don't have a place for that coupon payment to go. Okay. They're earning a return on an investment, and they're going to reinvest that return. They're going to reinvest that bond coupon rate, or that bond coupon payment, in another bond or a similar investment and get a similar return. So we have the situation with the realized coupon return takes into account changing reinvestment rates over time. To find the realized coupon rate, to find the realized compound return rate, we find the future value at the time of maturity, or when you plan on selling the bond, of the coupon payments yet to be received, compounded at the reinvestment rate and the price of the bond at the time. The compound return is the return that makes the present value of that amount equal to the bond price today. So what we're going to do is we're going to think through the cash flows that we get from a bond and the rate we can reinvest those at during the life of the bond. So for example, I'm going to keep the bond pretty simple here because the math can get complicated if we don't. So let's say that we purchase a bond today that makes annual coupon payments based on an 8% coupon rate. Okay. The bond matures in 3 years. Just as a reminder here, its par value is $1,000. And the yield to maturity on this bond is 9%. You will be able to reinvest the coupon payments at a 5% rate of return. And that's, that's not too far off of where we're at today. You can get a 1-year rate of return for 5% pretty easily through a certificate of deposit through a bank, which is, in some of the cases I've been in, what we would have actually done here. We receive the cash and say, okay, we don't want to lock this up for another 10 years and just reinvest that coupon into a certificate of deposit at a bank at 5% a year. So what we want to now calculate is what is the realized compound return for the bond and then the investments we're making with those coupon payments. So at the end of year 1, we're going to receive a coupon payment of 8%, or excuse me, of $80, and we're going to reinvest that at 5% for 2 years. At the end of year 2, we're going to receive an $80 payment, and we're going to reinvest that for 1 year. And then at the end of 3 years, we're going to receive our $1,080. So the first thing we want to do is figure up what the price of the bond is today. So how much we're going to invest. So what is the value of the bond today? So again, I'm going to open the calculator here. I'm going to go to, I'm going to turn it on, and then I'm already at the apps. I'm going to start up here with figuring out again. I want to figure out what my price is. So I'm going to say the bond matures in 3 years. So my N is equal to 3. My interest rate is 9%. That's my yield to maturity. I'm looking for the present value of this bond. It makes an annual coupon payment based on an 8% coupon rate, so it's $80. My future value is $1,000, because that's the par value, and my payments per year are equal to 1. So the first thing I'm doing here is figuring up what the present value of this bond is, what I'm going to pay for the bond. And so my present value is going to be alpha, and then enter. I'm going to pay $974.69 for this bond today. Okay, $974.60. Oh, 69, sorry. So what is the value of the bond and the reinvested coupons in 3 years at the time of maturity? So what's the value of the bond and reinvested coupons at the maturity date? So what we're going to do here is we can go ahead and know that we're going to receive $1,000 at maturity. So I don't want to include that in my calculation. So I will receive $1,000 for the bond at maturity, plus the value of the reinvested coupons. Okay. I will receive 3 $80 coupon payments during the life of the bond and reinvest them at 5% per year. So what that means is at the end of year 1, I'm going to receive $80 and I'm going to reinvest it for 2 years at 5%. So 1 year I'm going to reinvest it at 5%. That's going to give me an additional $4 of interest. And then I'm going to take that $84 and I'm going to reinvest it for another year for another, in this case, $4.20 worth of interest. The next year I'm going to receive $80. And I'm going to invest that for 5% for 1 year and receive $4. And then at the end of the last year, I'm going to receive $80. And that's actually going to be on the maturity date. So I'm not going to receive any additional interest. In the calculator, we can put it in like this. So my N is equal to 3. My interest rate is 5%. Okay. And so this is going to be the future value of an annuity. My present value is 0. My payment is going to be $80 because remember, I'm getting 3 payments of $80. My future value is what I'm looking for. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do here. I'm going to make one change though, just to make things clear. I'm investing $80. So I'm going to put in negative $80 here. And then I'm going to calculate my future value. So I have 3 payments of $80, earning 5% each time for each year. And at the end of the 3-year period, those 3 $80 investments are going to be worth $252.20. So the future value of my reinvested payments is $252.20. The total value of my investment in 3 years is the $1,000 I got from the par value of the bond, $252.20 from that $1,000 here. So now the last step is calculating that compound rate of return, my realized compound return. So my starting value is $1,252.20. My ending, or excuse me, not my starting value. My starting value is the amount I'm going to invest is $974.69. My ending value is $1,252.20. And now I just need to calculate the rate of return that'll be earned by investing $974.69 today and receiving $1,252.20 in 3 years. So in my calculator, my N is equal to 3. My interest rate's what I'm looking for. My present value is the amount that I'm investing today. So that's $974.69. So I'm going to put in here negative $974.69. My payment is 0 because remember I'm investing all of those $80 payments, and then I'm going to pop out at the end with $1,252.20. And I'm going to calculate the rate of return. Oops, sorry about that. There we go. I'm going to calculate my rate of return now from doing so. And I get 8.71%. So my realized compound return is equal to $8.71%. So this is one of those where you can ask if the answer makes sense. So the realized compound return should be in between the yield to maturity for the bond and the reinvestment rate for the bond coupons. Okay. And it does in this case because our yield to maturity is 9% and our reinvestment rate is 5%, and 8.71 is in between those two numbers. You couldn't have it at less than 5% because you're earning at least that amount. That's the minimum amount you're earning, and you couldn't have it for more than 9% because that's the most you're earning on your investments during this time. So it has to be somewhere in between those numbers. If you get an answer that isn't in between those two numbers, then you should oh, sorry. This is wrong here. The realized compound return should fall between the reinvestment rate, not the realized compound return. There we go. So that's why you have to have it between those two numbers because it If it's not, then you know that answer is incorrect. The next thing we're going to look at is the holding period return versus the yield to maturity. I like to show this because it gives you an idea of what's going on year to year with the value of the bonds and how that contributes to the rate of return you're going to earn as an investor. So what I have down here is that as long as the yield to maturity doesn't change, the holding period return will be the same as the yield to maturity. However, if the yield to maturity for a bond does change, then the holding period will be different from the yield to maturity. So in this example, we're going to start off by saying that the yield to maturity does not change. Okay. Which in honestly would generally not happen. Your yield to maturity over time will generally change for a bond, but we're going to start off by saying it's not changing. So I'm going to have my holding period return here, and let's go ahead and say that we have a bond. So we're going to call this bond H, and bond H makes annual coupon payments at a 9% coupon rate, has a par value of 1,000, has 10 years to maturity, and the yield to maturity is 7%. Okay. So the first thing we're going to start off with is what the value of the bond is today. So in your calculator, your input should look like this. So my bond has 10 years to maturity, so N is equal to 10. My yield to maturity is 7%, so that's what we're going to put in for the I. My present value is what I'm looking for. My payment is going to be annual coupon payments at 9%, at a 9% coupon rate, so my payment is 90. My future value is 1,000. And so my present value, I'm going to press alpha and then enter to get a present value of $1,140.47. So let's fast forward a year now. Okay, so we're going to fast forward a year. 1 year later, what is the value of the bond? So the only thing I need to change here is the N. So now we're going from having 10 years left to maturity to 9 years left to maturity. So my N is equal to 9. And now I'm going to change my present value. I'm going to press alpha and then enter. And now it says that the value of that bond today is $11.30 and 30 cents. Oops. So not a huge change. It went down in value by about $10, so $10.17. So now what we're going to see is what the holding period return is. So my holding period return is equal to the coupon payment. So in this case, my coupon payment was $90. My ending price was $11.30 and 30 cents. My beginning price was $11.40.47. And my beginning price was $11.40.47. So now I'm going to calculate my numerator. My numerator will look like this. So I'm going to press alpha and then mode. Excuse me, second and then mode. There we go. I'm going to clear that out. I'm going to take 90 plus 11.30 and 30 cents minus 11.40 and 47 cents. So my numerator is $79.83. I'm going to divide that by 11.40.47. And I get an answer of 0.06999997, or if we ran that, it's 7%. Okay, it's 0.07. So this is one thing I want you to remember. As long as the yield to maturity does not change, the value of the bond will adjust over time to give investors the yield to maturity on an annual basis. So that's what I want you to see here. The yield to maturity is 7%. The yield to maturity is 7, or the holding period return is 7. And that was achieved by adjusting the price down to give us a 7% return. And if you think back to premium versus discount bonds, you also see this here. This is a premium bond. The value of the bond declined from one year to the next from 11.40.47 to 11.30.30. So it went down by $10.17 in order to give us that 7% annual return when taking into account the $90 payment. So big star here, put big stars by this. If the yield to maturity for a bond does not change, the holding period return will be the yield to maturity for the bond. So let's change one thing in this problem now. For a long period of time, from about 2008 through 2022, we had incredibly low interest rates. And as a result, investors in general didn't want to invest in long-term bonds because of what happens to the value of the bond whenever interest rates increase. So in our second example here, we're going to start with the same bond, bond H, but in this case, we're going to say the yield to maturity increases. Okay. So we're going to say the yield to maturity increases. In our second example with this bond. And so if the yield to maturity increases from 7%, and I'm going to make life easy here, to 9% from when the bond had 10 years to maturity to when it had 9 years to maturity, we have two questions here. First of all, one, what happened to the price of the bond? And then two, what is the holding period return? Okay, so let's tackle one first. One's actually pretty easy. One is easy because if the yield to maturity increases from 7% to 9%, then the coupon rate is equal to the yield to maturity, and that's pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and put that in here. So I'm going to go back out to apps, and then one for finance, and then one for time value money solver. And so we're back there at 9%. Years to maturity is 9%, or excuse me, 9. The yield to maturity now went from 7% to 9%. Okay. My payment is $90 based on a 9% coupon rate, and our future value is $1,000. So my present value, and you can just put this in your memory banks to lock this in. Whenever the yield to maturity is equal to the coupon rate, the value of the bond is its par value. So I'm going to get a present value here of $1,000. Alpha, enter, and it gives me $1,000. Okay. So my price of the bond decreases to $1,000. So now we can calculate the holding period return, and this is again when the yield to maturity increases. So we can just see here what's going to happen. So our during the year, so remember we're going from 10 years to 9 years, we received a $90 payment. Okay. Our beginning price was that $11.47 with 10 years left to maturity. But now, because the yield to maturity increased, the value of our bond decreased to $1,000. Okay. So that's the only thing that changes in that equation there. Now I'm going to recalculate this return. This is the holding period return for 1 year. Press second and mode, and then clear, and then I'm going to take 90 plus 1,000 minus 1140.47. Press enter. So I have negative 50.47. So what happened here is I received $90, and at the end of the year, my bond is now only worth $1,000 because the required rate of return increased. I paid $11.47 for that bond the year before, and so I actually have a negative dollar return during the year. And then I'm going to divide that answer by the 1140.47 to get my percentage return for the year, which was, oops, sorry about that, which is 4.43%. Okay, negative 4.43%. So we had a long period of time, like I mentioned, 2008 through 2022, where in general interest rates were extraordinarily low. So the expectation was that interest rates were going to increase, or that yield to maturity on bonds was going to increase. And so as a result, a lot of institutional investors especially, but just retail investors too, out there were choosing not to invest in long-term bonds because the loss in value and the loss of return that they would have if they had to sell their bonds early. Now, if they don't sell that bond, okay, and they're back up here with 10 years to maturity, and they've got a yield to maturity of 7%, they're gonna have that bond, and they can earn that 7% yield to maturity as long as they hold that bond, and as long as the bond issuer doesn't go into default, and if the bond is not callable. If the bond is callable, then there is the bond being called. However, and if you think back when we talked about callable bonds, the likelihood is that they would not call that bond when interest rates go up. They're really only going to call it when interest rates go down. Okay, so that's it for this lecture. Please let me know if you have any questions, and there'll be a couple of questions online for you. Thanks.